Ever since it was first stated in a game theory video on January 1st this year, a very controversial theory has floated around the Five Nights at Freddy's community. That being that the main character of Security Breach, Gregory, the player character, is actually a robotic recreation of the crying child, the bite victim of 1983, Evan Afton. I've been a staunch opponent to this theory the entire time. Frankly, I just want new characters and I want to let sleeping dogs lie. There's compelling evidence for it, I just don't like it. However, I've been thinking, and I think the GregBot theory is almost right. I do think Evan Afton is in this game somewhere. I think the crying child has his presence all over Security Breach, but I don't think it's through Gregory. I think it's through the blob. At least, that's the idea I have for today. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's make ourselves a theory. In case you haven't seen the game theory video, which would be weird that you found my video before that one, but just in case, the basic theory boils down to in 1983, when Evan Afton dies from the bite. Yeah, that's fair. No. When the crying child dies in 1983, he's recreated as a robot, just like one of the characters in the Silver Eyes novels. That's what's meant when it said, "I will put you back together." That robot is who we play as in Security Breach, Gregory. There's a lot more to it, so for context and more evidence, go watch that video. But after this one, please, it really hurts it in the algorithm if you skip off right away, so just wait till the end, I'll put the links, trust me. Anyways, I don't believe this theory. I still think Gregory is just either a random child or a child we know but don't know who it is yet. I think Gregory's human. Maybe he's some child important in the lore, but a robotic version of Gregory isn't it. I don't buy it. However, I do think that the crying child is here. So let's gather our ingredients and examine what evidence we have of that. The last living moments we see of Evan Afton are in the FNAF 4 minigames, where we see him being relentlessly bullied by his older brother, Michael Afton, until eventually being killed accidentally by Fredbear's mouth closing in on his head, causing the bite of 1983. We then see several times some mysterious figures promising to put this kid back together. And we see the first set of the missing children incident kids have a happiest day party to help him move on. Also, the entirety of FNAF World is kind of a reimagining of these events. Up until now, most of the community agrees on what these events mean. Happiest Day helps him pass on, and that leaves the rest of the missing children incident kids to be stuck in the suits, then turn into Enard, and so on and so forth. But is that what happens in Happiest Day? Let's look again. In FNAF 4's epilogue, we see the Fredbear plush promising to put him back together, telling him that we are still his friends. In FNAF 3, we see all of them reunite with the crying child at his birthday. He gains a golden Freddy mask before they all disappear. Even in FNAF World, the same lines are repeated, except for an addition of, "the pieces are in place." The main problem I have with this is if the Happiest Day minigame is supposed to show Evan Afton moving on, it does a really bad job of showing that. What it does show us is a group of souls, each being identified by a different animatronic, giving a new soul its own identity. Then they disappear, just leaving the masks. This doesn't look like a soul being put to rest, and if it is, all of them are being put to rest, which we know isn't true, at least for the puppet. This looks like an indoctrination to me. Maybe this isn't just a birthday party, but a welcome party. Think about it. At this point, we're pretty sure the crying child doesn't die at the bite of 83. Instead, he gets seriously injured, put into a coma possibly, and dies at a hospital. We know this from FNAF 4. We see the IV, we see the pills. It's very clear that the victim of the bite of 83 was in a coma for at least some time before death. If the crying child died in unrest in a hospital, he wouldn't have just automatically inhabited the Golden Freddy suit. He would have been a lost soul wandering around looking for a place to return to. The puppet gave gifts and gave life to the children who were stuffed in the animatronic suits, but if they came across this lost soul, what could they do? It probably would have taken more work to help him. Something like grounding him in a familiar location, like a birthday party. What if the Happiest Day isn't being put to rest, but a day of coming home to comforting friends who promise they'll still be with him? If you don't believe that, I have another piece of really compelling evidence in Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator. In that game, when the animatronics kill you, you get a random voice line, a lot of them having lore. Most of them make sense, but there's one in particular that always stuck out to me, Molten Freddy. For those of you who aren't aware, Molten Freddy is most likely a cocktail of souls of the missing children incident kids. Briefly, William Afton kills 5 kids in the Freddy Fazbear Pizza location and stuffs them into animatronic suits. The puppet helps them to possess the suits they're in so they can live again. That restaurant closes and the FNAF 2 location opens up. The animatronics are in a withered state but still persist there as well, and William Afton starts taking apart pieces of them to experiment on. FNAF 2 closes after another incident, possibly William killing again, and the old bots are saved for a possible new location. Then the FNAF 1 location. A recreation of the older Freddy Fazbear Pizza opens up, with the same older animatronics but refurbished. William Afton comes in after the restaurant closes down and collects as many pieces of the animatronics as possible to experiment on. He then takes them to his sister location bunker to melt them down into remnant, a silvery metal liquid infused with a soul, or in this case, as they've been melted together, a mixture of all 5 souls of the missing children. He then uses the scooper to infuse this remnant into the Funtime animatronics. This makes them erratic and violent, being a weird blend of people. The Funtimes exit their exoskeletons and form together to make Enard, the closest thing they can be to whole again. After a while, they realize that Elizabeth's soul from Circus Baby is fully whole, so for whatever reason, either to help the confusion or just vote her out, she is ejected from Enard and becomes Scrap Baby. The remaining wires then form into Molten Freddy. So, the long and short of it is Molten Freddy is an amalgamation of metal made of the melted down and blended together souls of the missing children incident kids. I know I said briefly, but it's FNAF lore, so give me a break. Anyway, if Molten Freddy is this mixture of non-Afton kids, why is this one of his lines when he kills you?
One big happy family, together again.
That's weird, right? Like, this could just be referring to William, Elizabeth, and Michael being in the same place. But why would Molten Freddy say this? How would that amalgamation even clearly know what's going on? Well, I think that this line is hinting to us that there's an Afton still stuck inside Molten Freddy. And if Elizabeth, Michael, and William are all accounted for, that just leaves us with Evan. Think about it. We know that Cassidy is in Molten Freddy. After all, we see hints of Cassidy throughout FNAF 6, FNAF Ultimate Custom Night, and even Security Breach. So Cassidy would have to be there, and it would make the most sense to be in Molten Freddy. So Golden Freddy is most likely melted down into Remnant along with the other children. The same Golden Freddy whose mask gets put on the Crying Child in Happiest Day. So if Golden Freddy is possessed by Cassidy and Crying Child, like a lot of us believe, myself included, then it would make sense that both of them are still in Molten Freddy. Okay, so we've established that it's entirely possible that Evan didn't move on, but is instead with the missing children incident kids in Molten Freddy up until the end of FNAF 6. What makes me think that he's in the blob? Well, let's mix our ingredients together and see what comes out of it. 2 things stick out to me here: the Nightmare staff bots, and funnily enough, another game theory video. This video was actually originally intended to be about the post-it note room in Security Breach, because I created a community post on YouTube about what I should make the next video on, and users like these guys suggested not only the post-it room, but the Nightmare staff bots. By the way, if you want to see posts like that and be more engaged, the subscribe button is free, I'm just saying. Anyway, you know, that really confusing lore dump room with a lot of Happiest Day illusions, the Afton family recreated, filled with Nightmare staff bot heads. So just to make sure I wasn't treading old ground, I went and rewatched the game theory video posted about it on February 2nd. His theory boiled down to the room being a place where the Crying Child robot, Gregory, started to form a consciousness and recreate those memories that were coming back to him. The problem is, I found that really compelling. So how can I rectify that if Gregory isn't Evan Afton in a robotic form? Well, the blob. The blob is likely a pile of melted robotics from the pizzeria simulator fire, a pile dominated by the missing children incident kids' agony. There's one problem with that though. Does Evan Afton have agony? Sure, he was bullied every day, but thus far in the series, we only see agony form due to excruciatingly painful death, not just a shitty life. Could it be possible that Evan's agony is weaker or even non-existent, yet he still survived in a agony-like shell of the kids who tried to protect him so frequently, like we see in Happiest Day? If so, then this agony-fueled blob could have one soul in it, Evan Afton. If so, this could explain the post-it note room. If the blob is this writhing mass of agony and anger, but slowly being overtaken by the consciousness and soul of Evan Afton, these notes make a lot of sense. They start out messy and scribbled, and slowly add more and more of Crying Child's last memories. Like MatPat said, the last thing he saw, the lights in the room, the party. All of the evidence MatPat brought up to link this room with Evan Afton tracks, but in this case, it's not Gregory, it's the blob, someone who would have a reason to be in the sewer, as it's likely that it's trying to amass more pieces of itself and it needs a big open area to move around in, like that weird sewer dump place. What about the Nightmare staff bots? Well, we don't really have a compelling argument for them. All we know is they look like Nightmare-own, they have In Your Dreams written on a bunch of them, and they're generally pretty weird. What if these robots are the staff bots taken over by the blob? For one, this could be the Centurions being sent to get more pieces to make the blob bigger. And after all, the place where we see the most of these staff bots is in those dumps, the place where the blob could most freely move around. So what would this mean for the DLC? Well, let's put this mixture into the oven and see what kind of theory bakes out. If Afton's soul or agony is slowly gaining consciousness in the blob, and William is presumably now fused into the blob as well, the help me we see could be a help for the blob. Gregory, Freddy, or maybe even Vanessa sees that now the blob has an internal struggle, a massive agony being fought over between the agony of a murderer and the soul of a child. If William wins, he'll be more powerful than ever, but if Evan wins, he could help the blob move on for good and end everything. We as Light Up Sketchers Girl just need to do anything we can to help Evan dominate the blob. At least, that's the theory we baked for today. John FNAF just broke security breach wide open, and we need to talk about the repercussions. And yes, I'm sick again. But slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. First, let's gather our ingredients. Last week, FNAF posted a part 2 to his two-parter theory, and there's a lot of great stuff in there. I disagree with some things, and I want to look more into other things myself, but for the sake of this video, let's just assume everything he said in that was true. What did he say? Well, I'm not going to be discussing the merits of the theory itself in this video, I just want to talk about the repercussions of it. But for the sake of clarity, and to put it very, very simplistically and briefly, when William killed Charlotte Emily, Henry rebuilt her in a child form but discarded the project. William took the discarded pieces and made them into his own killer minibot, and Glitchtrap used that illusion disc-wielding childlike robot as another helper during the setup for security breach, that robot being Patient 46. When the blob makes its presence known, Glitchtrap and Vanessa can tell that many of the souls still reside in the blob, specifically Charlotte and Cassidy. Knowing that either of these souls could become a problem for Glitchtrap, he then orders Vanessa to use the mini-robot as a vessel for Charlotte's soul, and they threw the now possessed Charlotte robot into the sticky room pit to keep an eye on her. They also put Cassidy within the 3 Princess Quest arcade machines to trap them. There's a lot more to it and a lot of evidence that points to that he has in his video, so after you're done here, definitely check it out. But after you're done here, leaving a video too early hurts it in the algorithm. What I really want to get at is the ripples in the timeline that this theory could potentially create. As we've discussed previously, Help Wanted and the books seem to be making a new timeline with the ongoing FNAF games. Sort of a soft reboot. It seems pretty clear that Steel Wool and Scott want to create a new narrative as they move forward without being bogged down by the specifics of the older narrative. So if this theory is true, it could direct us as to what went on before the Pizzaplex in this new timeline. And before anyone gets mad that they're changing the narrative we've spent the past so many years discovering and trying to figure out, just think of it like this. We now have 2 separate but similar timelines. The old timeline made up of these games in probably this order or something similar that we've pretty much figured out. It has William and his plan, Michael trying to foil it, and Henry Emily's ultimate plan to end the whole thing. Now we have a new timeline, with FNAF 6 onward probably actually existing, and the previous games existing in this sort of dubious canon non-canonicity. All the work we've done up until now is cracking this timeline, and now that it's mostly solved, we have this timeline to look at instead. So, like I mentioned, in this new timeline, the first 5 games are in this sort of dubious canonicity, whereas FNAF 6 onwards seem to be more canon. We used Help Wanted to find that games 1 through 5 can be mostly discarded. Cat butt. But the 8-bit minigames seem to be more accurate as to what actually happened. We also know from the books that whoever made these first 5 games seems to not really know what exactly happened at Fazbear Entertainment, or have very little knowledge of the true events, thanks to a recent game theory video. So if we put together my theory about how Help Wanted dictates what happened in the earlier games and what didn't happen, MatPat's theory about how the indie developer didn't know what actually happened and was doing his best, and FNAF's new theory about what probably happened in this new timeline, if we mix all those together, what can that tell us about what actually happens in the new timeline? Well, let's mix our ingredients and see what comes out of it. I think the most logical place to start is the most recent game, and then we can start to walk backwards until we run out of evidence. FNAF already did a great job of explaining how the Charlie robot and Elizabeth interact with security breach, so that feels like already tread ground. However, I disagree with how the Charlie bot got there in the first place. So let's go back to where that and Elizabeth's soul previously resided before security breach, the FNAF 6 location, Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator, seemingly the beginning to the new timeline. God, it's hot in here. Do you like the new digs? Because you guys were the ones that made it happen with such amazing support. For anyone that doesn't know, in the description I have a Koji link, and one of the links on there is to upgrade the channel. It's basically fundraisers for new equipment. It was recently a green screen, but it just shot past it. So I updated it for a clearer camera, but because we now have a green screen, we've got this. I'm totally in Pizzeria Simulator. This isn't, don't worry about it. But thank you all so much for the amazing support. And again, do not think it's necessary. Just watching the video is more than enough support. But shout out to these crazy people who are all anonymous, so I could not find names. Autumn Wolf, while I was editing, I found your username. You're crazy. Thank you. You are wild. Thank you. But thank you so much for everything. Anyways, in my previous theory, I stated that Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator has to be a real event and not an in-universe game. There's just so much lore in it that we needed it as an anchor. But at the time, I was fusing the old timeline with the new timeline. And I have to stop doing that. Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator is canon in the old timeline, but in the new timeline, I don't think it is. I know this is a radical shift, but hear me out. First off, you guys are right, okay? I looked at this plush again. That's Scrap Baby. Look at the colors of the hair, look at the claw in the hand. I was wrong, you guys are right. Scrap Baby is referenced in Help Wanted. Not only that though, look at the blob in Security Breach. By all accounts, the blob should be made up of Lefty, Scrap Trap, Scrap Baby, and Molten Freddy, but it's not. Look closely. It's made up of Funtime Freddy, Circus Baby, the Marionette, and Scrap Trap is nowhere to be found. Neither is Lefty. We can assume that Scrap Trap would have been pulled out by Vanessa to make Burn Trap. But where's Lefty? Where's Scrap Baby? Where's Molten Freddy? You could argue that just like the older animatronics, these new pieces were pulled out of Rockstar Row, but I don't think that's the case. The head of this blob is Funtime Freddy. It seems to be mostly acting as Funtime Freddy with this blob of entities attached to it. How would the main operandi be taken from Rockstar Row? It had to have been there from the beginning. It had to have been essentially a bigger Molten Freddy, or a bigger proto-blob piloted by Funtime Freddy. If Fazbear Entertainment wants to put all of this dark history behind them by using a series of indie games, why would they end on FNAF 4, a video game that just shows us a kid with nightmares dying? Or why would they end on FNAF Sister Location, a game that says, oh, there's a mess of Fazbear animatronics somewhere out there trying to get you and it will pilot your skin? These are bad looks. Why wouldn't they end with Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator? A game that says, hey, don't worry, all the evil animatronics are gone. We burned them. Now it's just safe Freddy Fazbear. In this new timeline, the game's timeline, Pizzeria Simulator is likely the last game the indie dev made. He was told about something that happened at this location, so he just embellished the horror, stressed the resolution. I mean, it's not like Fazbear would have actually known what Henry was trying to do. It's incredibly likely that what actually took place at this location that we see in Security Breach was wildly different. It wasn't Molten Freddy, Scrap Trap, Scrap Baby, and Lefty. It was an amalgamation of Funtime Freddy. It was Spring Trap. It was Circus Baby. It was just the Marionette. It was an attempt to burn down these robots and free their spirits. Well, how would CharlieBot have gotten there? Well, I agree with FNAF's interpretation that CharlieBot was created by Henry Emily after the death of Charlotte by the hands of William, but I don't think that Henry discarded her. I think he kept her with him to assist him in grieving and later to assist him in finally destroying whatever is left of William Afton. This creates narratively a really satisfying storyline of William and his killer robotic circus baby daughter Elizabeth trying to wreak havoc, and Henry and his helpful robotic daughter CharlieBot trying to stop them. If CharlieBot was helping Henry in this new timeline, it would make sense for her to be at the FNAF 6 location, and for her to just be present at the burning. If everything else is gone, she would want to be gone too. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Everyone just pooled into Funtime Freddy's amalgamate, forming the blob as we know it. But now, Elizabeth, Charlie, and Cassidy are all stuck in the same massive unit. When Glitchtrap ordered his freshly mind-wiped slave Vanessa into that pit to go retrieve him, just like Sister Location, Elizabeth was rejected from the hive mind. After all, besides Springtrap, she would be the only soul in there who's actually wants William to succeed. But there's nothing else for her to go into. So when a human with a blank spot of her mind controlled by Glitchtrap enters, that's the perfect home for Elizabeth to go into. Vanessa became possessed. Vanny, as we see her in Security Breach, could be the combination of Elizabeth's soul melded into the blank spot that Glitchtrap carved out of Vanessa's mind. But wait, if Molten Freddy and Scrap Baby never existed in this new timeline, did Enard? I don't think so. So let's go back to Sister Location. At least it's air conditioned in here. So, Enard, one of my favorite guys. I don't think he's real in the new timeline. I mean, think about it. He's directly referenced in Help Wanted, and he's a goddamn cutout in Security Breach. If the events in Sister Location took place as we know them, Enard should not be public knowledge, let alone a photo opportunity. But if Enard was never real, what actually took place at Sister Location? Frankly, we don't have enough evidence right now to point to an actual plot line. But let's speculate on one of the possibilities. Seeing how separate Circus Baby is from the other fun times in the new timeline version of FNAF 6, we could speculate that Circus Baby never melded into Enard, or what I'll just call the proto-blob. That being Funtime Freddy, Ballora, and Funtime Foxy. If Michael truly went down to that bunker to search for his sister and found Circus Baby clearly haunted by Elizabeth, is it not possible that he feels bad enough to just let her leave? After all, most of her exoskeleton is present in the blob, and if she left via Enard, none of it should have been retrievable. A possible plot of this game in the new timeline is when Michael sees how dangerous all of the other fun times are, he just scoops them in the scooping room, letting Elizabeth leave. But as he tries to leave behind her, the mass of Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, and Ballora, the proto-blob, get Michael, scoop him, and leave via him. So the idea of Enard and Michael being scooped is still there, it's just slightly different, like this whole timeline is from the older timeline. Again, this is really speculative, and I have no evidence to base this on, but it would lead to the outcomes that we see in a likely version of the new timeline's FNAF 6, where Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, and Ballora all escape as a mass of a proto-blob, Michael still dies, and Circus Baby can make it to FNAF 6. I still have a lot of questions about what happened in this bunker and how we got there, but frankly, in this new timeline, we don't have any evidence for any of that. We barely have evidence to point us towards FNAF 6 outside of this room and the blob. So any more speculating on previous things is just going to get more and more futile. All we can speculate to is if these games didn't happen, events similar to them did, but they were either misinterpreted by the indie dev or just made up by him entirely. We can assume so far that the 8-bit minigames are still true, that there were 5 victims from William Afton, possibly 10, Charlie was killed by William Afton, some of the animatronics got haunted, and the bite probably still happened, if we are to believe the 8-bit minigames. At least some form of them happened. Something happened. But right now, we don't have enough evidence to point to what. Essentially, they can't be trusted, but don't throw them out yet. So with the interpretation of the new timeline lended to us by FNAF, the guidance of what the indie dev knows lended to us by game theory, and my theory about what Help Wanted tells us about the new timeline, what can we create? What is this new timeline made of? What do we know so far? Well, this place is giving me the heebie-jeebies, so first, let's get back home. That is the best way to travel. Alright, I'm not going to do a full timeline because that'll have to be its own separate video. It'll be massive if I try to do that now. Frankly, we also don't have enough evidence before, like, 2 games from now. For now, let's just try to isolate Sister Location, Pizzeria Simulator, and Security Breach, and see how those games interact and the games that did or didn't happen in between them. So let's pop our mixture into the oven and see what kind of horrors begin to rise. William wants to have access to his Funtime animatronics, so he tells Michael to go into his old bunker to find them. Michael agrees only to try and help what possibly remains of his sister, and what he finds terrifies him. Circus Baby, the very animatronic that caused the death of his sister, has come to be possessed by her. He frees her, but in doing so gets captured and killed by the endoskeleton amalgamate of Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, and Ballora, sort of a proto-blob. Then, sometime after, Henry comes up with the idea of Pizzeria Simulator. He and his robotic recreation of his daughter Charlie put the plan into motion, and they're able to trap Circus Baby being haunted by Elizabeth, the puppet being haunted by the actual soul of Charlotte, and Springtrap being haunted by William Afton, and the Proto-Blob being haunted by William's victims. Henry, Michael, and Charles E. all then attempt to burn themselves and everything else down to the ground, and let every soul involved in this plot find peace. But these souls are stronger than that. Just like in the FNAF 3 minigames, when the metal shells are destroyed, the souls are left wandering in that space, trapped. This could possibly show Ultimate Custom Night, as since William is outnumbered, the souls in that room could just be tormenting him in that purgatory. So, suddenly, the first mystery of this new timeline presents itself. Somehow, the remains of Springtrap need to be scanned, and Charliebot needs to be freed by the discovery of the Pizzeria Simulator room in order for the events of Security Breach to take place. But the events of Security Breach are what discovers the Pizzeria Simulator room, so there becomes an inconsistency there. Maybe the room is discovered and then the pizza plex is built on top, but if that's the case, why does Elizabeth's and Michael's soul stay in there until later? It's hard to tell. So maybe the remains that are scanned to create Glitchtrap and CharlieBot are held elsewhere and found elsewhere by the company. It's unclear. I know FNAF concluded that CharlieBot was held somewhere else as well, so I'll leave that as is and we'll just gloss over that detail for now. Once Glitchtrap is formed and wiped part of Vanessa's mind to make room for a brainwashed slave, he uses the CharlieBot to perform tasks in the real world, inhabiting it and giving orders to Vanessa with it. That way, he's not stuck in the VR game anymore. He orders her to start digging through the floor of the Pizzaplex to find the room where they're all located. She does this with the help of Glamrock Freddy and CharlieBot at the Pizzaplex. During this time is when the CharlieBot becomes Patient 46, being inhabited by the Glitchtrap virus. Once they get into the pizzeria simulator room, everything sets into motion at once. Michael's soul flies into the Glamrock Freddy animatronic, Elizabeth's soul flies into the vacancy in Vanessa's mind. Once Elizabeth's influence infiltrates that mind, Glitchtrap and her are made aware that this isn't just a pile of souls around William, but two of his worst enemies. Charlie and Cassidy are here as well. Always a fan of the dramatic and cruel irony, Glitchtrap and Vanny Elizabeth attempt to trap these souls in poetic ways. Since Cassidy possibly influenced the FNAF World game to assist in the crying child's passing, they put her remnant into a series of Princess Quest arcade cabinets and hide them in the facility. And since Charlie was so focused on bringing the souls back into robotic bodies, Glitchtrap leaves the CharlieBot vessel, and they put Charlie's soul into it. They then throw her into the guarded trash silo. Then Vanny Elizabeth went to work on recreating William and Burntrap. Meanwhile, Glitchtrap attempted to slowly corrupt the other animatronics. Their new plan? Find specimen perfect to recreate what happened with Vanessa. Find humans that can be brainwashed and then turned into Afton's new family. But when Freddy finds that the perfect crying child specimen in Gregory, his Afton programming collides with Michael's recognition of someone that looks just like his kid brother, and Freddy short circuits, and thus the beginning of security breach. Whew, this is a big one. And while I'm pretty confident in the chunk of this, there's some parts of it that I disagree with. I mean, first off, I still think Patient 46 is Vanny. Also, there's that mystery in the middle of how they got discovered, but were in the hole. I know FNAF posits that CharlieBot was never in the hole to begin with, and that's how she gets discovered. It's still really messy and confusing, but I think this is a good foundation to start theory crafting about this new timeline. Really, this is the most we can theorize about until something new gets discovered, someone thinks of something else, or the DLC gets released.
Move over, Gregory! There's a new robot human in town, and her name is Elizabeth Afton, and Vanessa, and Vanny, and probably the head of Fazbear Entertainment LLC too.
Yeah. We're gonna talk about that. MatPat just released a wild game theory, and it's one of my favorite kinds of theories on YouTube. The kind that makes you go, oh god, he's right. Now, as per usual on this channel, we're not going to be critiquing the theory itself. More so, we're going to be looking at the repercussions that this theory could have in the timeline if it proves to be true. And while we do that, we'll look for other supporting evidence we can find on the way. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. First, let's gather our ingredients. What exactly was the theory posited by MatPat and his team? Well, I'm only going to go over it very briefly. So if somehow you found this video before you found the game theory video, please, when you're done here, go watch the full video on game theory for the entire theory, the context, and the evidence. But do that after you watch this video, because if you leave this video too quickly, it'll hurt it in the algorithm. I'll put a link in the description and at the end, I promise. But for the theory itself, to be incredibly brief and oversimplify, the idea boils down to the game timeline paralleling the book timeline. And in the games, instead of Henry being the one to build several robotic versions of Charlie after her death, William was the one to build several differently aged robotic versions of Elizabeth. This would explain why Vanessa is so similar to Elizabeth in so many ways. It's why Vanny and Vanessa look so similar without being the same person, why the girl in the Ruin poster looks so similar to Elizabeth, and can even explain why someone bought up Fazbear Entertainment and keeps doing business decisions that are helping to revive William Afton, as Elizabeth seems to be the only person in the FNAF canon who likes and supports William. Again, after this video, go watch the full game theory video. It's very well made, and it has a little cameo of yours truly, which is crazy to think about, and I'm still very humbled and thankful that something like that can even happen. But anyway, let's just start looking at the evidence that can support this theory and the ripples in the timeline it creates. The first thing to consider is, when would this have happened? I think it makes the most sense for this to happen before Afton becomes Springtrap. I mean, I feel like you would need most of his dexterity, and it doesn't really give him a lot of time if he's locked up in a back room until FNAF 3 to then create a bunch of Elizabots. So keeping logic in mind, I think it makes the most sense for this to happen pretty much immediately after Elizabeth's death. A lot of people, myself included, consider the death of Elizabeth to be one of the inciting incidents in the story. Now, I don't think it's the first one, because I think William needs a compelling reason to build the fun times in the first place, but I think it is definitely one of the first ones out there. And once the fun times are built, we've then established that William knows about Remnant, is doing experiments with Remnant, and is starting to learn the inner workings of how possession works. Right then would be the perfect time for him to start experiments with the Elizabots. It's sort of an escalation of the logic Henry uses in the books. Henry's logic is to just create a robotic replica of his late daughter. That way they can still live with the memory of her living with them. She gets to have a sort of sentience. It gets weird when you talk about robot moralities, but this isn't Detroit Become Human, I'm not talking about that. William doesn't just want copies. He invented the scooper, something that by definition injects Remnant into a robot. Why would he want to do this? You're just my pointer today. Are you just vibing? Vibing kitty? So that once he's completed the smallest version of Elizabeth, he can inject Elizabeth's soul from Circus Baby into it. Then every time he moved up a robot age, he could repeat the process. And theoretically, he could do this until he ran out of materials to make more Elizabots, or keeled over as an old man. This fits into the game timeline surprisingly well. But then the question becomes, why did he never inject Circus Baby into the first Elizabot? And how did the Elizabots break free from the sister location bunker? Well, I actually have a surprising finding that might explain this. So let's mix our ingredients and see what kind of theories come together. So, sort of an announcement, for the anniversary of the video that really kicked off this channel, the timeline video I posted last year, I wanted to do a 4-part mini-series in December. I know Game Theory is also mentioning of doing a master timeline for their side, but the timeline I'm looking at is a little bit different. Looking into the timeline theory that I've been kind of crafting in these past few videos, I think there's 2 distinct timelines in FNAF right now. There's the old timeline of the games from FNAF 1 to Ultimate Custom Night, and the new timeline of Help Wanted to now. And then the old games in the new timeline are a dubious canon. Either they did happen or they didn't happen. It's hard to tell with the evidence we have right now, but they definitely happened in the old timeline. So if we solve that old timeline, either we solve the timeline of FNAF up until Help Wanted, or we solve the timeline of FNAF that wants to be presented by Fazbear Entertainment in the current new timeline. So either way, it's a win. So what I wanted to do in December was make 2 videos compiling all of the lore evidence in every FNAF game from FNAF 1 to Ultimate Custom Night. Every single piece of lore I can find, compile it, put it into videos on the internet so then other people can use it for research purposes. Then the third video, are you done being my pointer? Okay, bye. Then the third video would be linking those pieces together to form a timeline. The 4th video on December 30th will be a standalone, just no frills timeline video. And then that way, if you want evidence for the timeline, I can just direct to the 3 videos before and we don't have to waste time in the timeline video. So mark your calendars. December 30th, we will be making the definitive old timeline of FNAF, using only evidence from the games from FNAF 1 to Ultimate Custom Night, and we'll see what comes out of it. Of all the timelines ever made, it'll be one of them. Okay, announcement aside, the reason I bring this up, besides to announce it, is that I found something really interesting in FNAF 1. Take a look at these posters. Yeah, okay, we know these. These are like the quintessential FNAF lore. This is FNAF 1. Occasionally, one of the posters can turn into a newspaper article. This tells us about the first missing children incident. 5 kids go missing, the robots seem to have an acrid smell, and that's it. That's old news. But notice twice in these articles, it's mentioned that the culprit of the missing child incident was not only found, but convicted. William Afton went to jail. Like prison. If this is true, this has huge implications for the timing of the timeline. Think about it. He created the fun times to experiment with remnant injection. With the knowledge that he wanted to eventually create an Elizabot with Elizabeth's soul in it, the pieces start to fall into place. That's why he wanted to inject remnant into the fun times. He wanted to test out his method without risking losing his daughter's soul. That's why Circus Baby doesn't seem to have any remnant injected inside her. He knows Elizabeth's soul is already in there, so he doesn't want to compromise it. That's why he asks Michael to go in the sister location bunker. This has sort of been a sticking point for myself and a lot of other theorists out there. In the monologue we get from Michael at the end of Sister Location, we hear this.
I found it. It was right where you said it would be. They were all there. And I found her. I put her back together. together, just like you asked me to. She's free now.
It was right where you said it would be? I put her back together? The big question lingering on everyone's minds, at least mine, why in the hell would William tell Michael to go down in the bunker and complete an experiment for him? Why would William just not do it himself? Why would William want to share knowledge about the sister location bunker to anybody, let alone Michael, someone I'm pretty sure he knows wants to do him in or wants nothing to do with him? Why didn't he do it himself? Because he couldn't. He was in prison. If William is behind bars, he can't check on his Elizabeths. He can't check on Circus Baby, which he knows has the soul of Elizabeth in it. If he was going to prison for a long time, he would need someone to continue his experiments, or at the very least, just try to inject Elizabeth into an Elizabeth so she can live happily outside of that bunker until he gets out to finish the experiment. But Michael failed the task. He failed and misunderstood what William was trying to tell him. If William said something like, your sister is there, go put her back together, and we see what Michael does in sister location because of it, Michael never found the room of Elizabeth's. He was caught off guard. He found Circus Baby being possessed by his late sister, and before he could figure out anything else, he's killed by the Fun Times, and then Enard escapes. And we all know that when Enard escapes, eventually Elizabeth gets booted from the tribe. Now, we were all going off of the notion this is because Elizabeth supports and likes William Afton, whereas the rest of Enard really hates his guts. But now there could be another reason. If Elizabeth knows the Elizabeths are in that bunker waiting to be turned on and used, but every other Fun Time would want nothing to do with that bunker, so logically they would split. Scrap Baby would split off of Enard, forming Molten Freddy, because she wants to go back down there, release the Elizabeths, and get into one of them. She doesn't want to be Scrap Baby, she wants to be Elizabeth. But then when she gets there and starts turning on the Elizabeths, no matter how many she turns on, none of them know how to use the scooper. They need William Afton, so they go out and look for him. Scrap Baby goes and wanders some alleyways and the other Elizabeths disperse. Now, the Follow Me minigames from FNAF 3 make even more sense. If Afton is eventually released from prison, he'd go to that bunker and find nobody there. Seeing that Circus Baby and all the Elizabeths are gone, he'd probably assume that all is well, or that he at least needs more remnant to continue his work. So he would probably go to the most recently closed Freddy Fazbear's to try to collect more remnant. He gets inside, he lures them into the back room, but once he's disassembled all but Golden Freddy, the souls corner him into a springlock suit, and he dies. Now, this does technically hinge on a theory that not a lot of people support for a decent reason. It's the idea that the Fun Times are either made from parts of remnant of the original animatronics, which seems more likely, or that the Fun Times are infused with the second missing child incident. Now, some people argue that there's only one, but I believe the evidence in FNAF 2 points us to two different missing child incidents. But regardless, I think this holds weight. Okay, I admit I ranted there for a moment. When I was writing this script, my mind was going a mile a minute and my fingers were just trying to keep up. So let me summarize and make this as succinct as possible and just straightforward tell what the timeline would be, or at least a possible timeline, if there are indeed multiple Elizabeths in Security Breach. So let's pop our mixture into the oven and see what kind of theories rise. After the crying child's death in the jaws of a Fredbear animatronic, William Afton kills the children responsible in retaliation, shoving their bodies into the very animatronic suits that they did his son, save for his eldest son, Michael. But then he starts to notice the animatronics acting strangely, almost possessed. It's as if the children's souls attached to the machines. He needed to know more in case there was a way of bringing his son back. So then he makes the Funtime animatronics, a set of animatronics essentially built to recreate the Bite of 83, but in a more controlled environment. But then that backfires, and it instead kills his only daughter, Elizabeth Afton. He locks the Funtimes into the bunker he built them in, but then he notices Circus Baby speaking with the memories of Elizabeth, combined with the personality and programming of Circus Baby. He was right, and he can bring his own daughter back too. He begins to work on robotic versions of his daughter, with the personality and programming to match the soul. That way he can optimize compatibility. Once he has a good number of Elizabeths created and is confident he can keep creating them as she ages, he begins working on the Scooper, a machine specifically invented to inject remnant into an animatronic. But he realizes he needs more remnant to work with to truly test this out. So he goes to the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria and starts to do experiments there. He gets enough remnant to inject the Fun Times, and it seems like it's going well. But as he collects more remnant, he gets sloppy. He gets caught. He goes to prison. Now, William Afton can't continue his experiments, and his own daughter is stuck, haunting an animatronic in a locked bunker. Desperate to continue, he calls his eldest son from prison. Knowing he can't say too much without causing an investigation, he tells him to go to that place. She'll be there, put her back together. He means to put Elizabeth's soul into an Elizabot and set her free, but when Michael goes down, he's caught off guard. He never finds the Elizabots. He's instead killed, setting free Enard. But when Elizabeth's soul wants to go back to the bunker to set herself free, they split, forming Molten Freddy and Scrap Baby. Scrap Baby goes down and starts activating and setting free the other Elizabots, but since none of them can operate the scooper, they instead seek out Afton. Eventually, Afton is released from prison, checks on the bunker, and finds it completely empty. From his perspective, it might have worked. Michael maybe did it. Now he would focus on recreating his son. He goes to the closed down Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and begins disassembling the animatronics there to get access to more remnant, but is cornered into the Springlock suit and dies. Thus, we have Springtrap to Scrap Trap, Molten Freddy and Scrap Baby, and plenty of Elizabeths. Enough that one of them can buy the company, one can infiltrate the new subsidiaries under it so that Elizabeth can watch the whole way through, and finally reunite with her father. I know this is crazy, but it's an interpretation of the timeline that could 1. Lend itself to the multiple Elizabeth theory, and 2. Match with the current motivations of Burntrap that we can surmise, wanting to recreate his family. Look, y'all know you were signing up for a wild theory if we're going with Elizabeth's all the way down. But I feel really confident about game theory's interpretation. Even if what I propose for the timeline isn't accurate, I think there's more truth to this situation than there is falsehoods.
Somebody discovered something in Ultimate Custom Night that might finally tell us definitively who is responsible for it. Who's the one behind everything? Who is the one you should not have killed? And believe it or not, it all comes down to a number. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. Ultimate Custom Night is one of the most debated FNAF games to this day, but not all of its aspects are so hotly debated. After all, 99% of FNAF fans agree that the whole point of Ultimate Custom Night is William Afton is being tortured in some sort of memory purgatory for the foreseeable future. All of his worst deeds are being thrown back at him to make him suffer for what he did. And that's all pretty well established and understandable to get to. The big debate comes into who's doing this. Who's capable of creating this kind of torment? And in what form are they? Because there are a few options in front of us, and plenty of candidates who would like to make William suffer. Now, many people just assume that Golden Freddy is the one doing Ultimate Custom Night. After all, the final cutscene of the game is Golden Freddy twitching and fading into the distance, as if to say we're going to be here forever. Golden Freddy is also the only unkillable animatronic. You can collect a death coin during a run of Ultimate Custom Night and use it to disable one animatronic, killing them. But if you try to use this on Golden Freddy, not only does it not work, but a custom Fredbear jump scare occurs, the only time in the game that you can see this. And I would say that a majority of people do believe that Golden Freddy is the one behind Ultimate Custom Night, but it's not agreed upon, nor is it confirmed. Some people believe that this final cutscene is just whoever is doing Ultimate Custom Night reminding William of all of the terrible things he did, starting all the way back to his negligence leading to the death of the crying child. Sure, Michael Afton was the one that put him in there, but William should have been watching his damn kids. All this to say, Golden Freddy being the conductor of Ultimate Custom Night, while heavily speculated, is not confirmed. But then again, even with this argument, Golden Freddy is a vessel, not a spirit. So whether or not Golden Freddy's vessel is hosting the spirit who's behind Ultimate Custom Night, we still have to agree upon what spirit is behind Ultimate Custom Night. And for the most part, there's really 3 major candidates that people bring up in these debates. One of the least argued for but most narratively satisfying options is Michael Afton. After all, in every FNAF game leading up to Ultimate Custom Night, at least for some portion of the game, we seem to be playing as Michael Afton. So it's fitting that the final game in this series is Michael Afton running the game and William Afton being the one forced to play. And Michael has been trying to stop William for the entire series, so him finally successfully doing that is narratively satisfying. But frankly, there's not a lot of evidence pointing to Michael being the one doing Ultimate Custom Night, outside of narrative satisfaction, which is subjective and not evidence. You can use how well it fits into a narrative as support for your argument, but it should never be the basis, and I'm not saying it is for Michael. There is some evidence to suggest suggest that he's the one doing this. For one, of the 3 candidates I'm going to bring up, Michael Afton is the only one who's seen all of these animatronics, especially the nightmare animatronics. So if he's the one creating it, he would have had to see the animatronics. But that can be explained by the way that Ultimate Custom Night works. It's theorized based on what we know from the books that the way Ultimate Custom Night works is it's a conglomeration of the memories of William Afton and whoever is doing this, using both of their memories to force William to suffer. And sure, Michael Afton is the only candidate who's seen all these animatronics, but William Afton has also seen all of these animatronics. So as long as the person doing this is at least partly using William Afton's memory, which seems to be likely, then that isn't really an argument for only Michael Afton, just an argument that Michael Afton could be a candidate. So speaking of books, who's our next candidate? None other than Andrew. Andrew is a character from the Fazbear Fright series of short stories, and he's got some pretty strong evidence conceptually for doing Ultimate Custom Night, mainly down to the fact that in the Fazbear Fright story, The Man in Room 1280, Andrew is essentially doing Ultimate Custom Night on William. The story follows William being rescued from the FNAF 6 fire and brought to a hospital, and everyone agrees he should be dead. He's a burnt corpse in a hospital bed, but somehow he's still alive. There seems to be 2 consciousnesses inside of his brain when scanned, and whenever they try to kill him, some ghost of a little boy stops them in some way. At the end of the story though, he's wheeled to a Fazbear Entertainment warehouse, and he just kind of explodes onto a bunch of merchandise, infecting all of it with his agony. But we cut later to the epilogues, where we see the point of view of this little boy, Andrew, a spirit who, by the time we meet him in the epilogues, doesn't remember exactly why, but knows that he hated William Afton so much that he wanted to keep him alive to make him suffer as long as possible. Which, like, that's just Ultimate Custom Night, right? Like, keeping someone alive for the express purpose of torturing them forever. And if we had full confirmation that all of these books are 100% within the game's timeline, then this would be a settled case. We could just say that Andrew is doing Ultimate Custom Night and move on. But there's one major problem with this. There is not a single piece of evidence in any of the FNAF games that Andrew exists at all. The closest we've ever gotten is actually in one of the most recent FNAF games, FNAF Into the Pit from Mega Cat Studios. In that game, recreating one of the first Fazbear Fright stories, not only does it mention things that appear in the epilogues, like the ball pit and there's an Eleanor minigame, but we literally see the Stitch Wraith, the thing that Jake and Andrew's soul are inside of, outside of Oswald's bedroom window in a rare Easter egg. So like, that's Andrew existing in the games, but then we have to have the whole debate on if Into the Pit is a separate series of games from the mainline Steel Wool and Scott Cawthon games. We don't know, it's technically unclear. So because there's ambiguity, Andrew is just a candidate who doesn't have any evidence in these Scott/Steel Wool games. So who's our last candidate then? Cassidy. Everyone was waiting for it, but Cassidy is a big mystery for a lot of fans, understandably so. Because similar to Andrew, Cassidy doesn't technically have any evidence linking them to any of the games. We don't even know Cassidy's gender, but there are a couple of very important pieces of evidence to consider when considering the game's timeline. Firstly, the security logbook, something that came out alongside these FNAF games. And in that security logbook, we get a conversation from what seems to be between 3 speakers. Someone who writes in red ink, Mike, likely Michael Afton judging from what he knows and what he draws, someone who speaks with faded text on the page, and someone who speaks through manipulating the text on the page. I won't tread over old ground. This book has been covered a lot. I myself made a video on this book not only a couple months ago, which you can find right here. Long story short, in my opinion, the evidence in front of us suggests that the 3 speakers are Michael Afton, the faded text is Cassidy, and the manipulated text is the crying child, who recently, through theories by HyperDroid and others, have been probably settled on Dave. But notably, that person named Cassidy is also missing some memories and believes their name belongs on a tombstone. And this name Cassidy isn't just something fans made up overnight. Scott Cawthon himself, in a Reddit post, hinted at the fact that Cassidy is important to the lore. Oh, we're going to Reddit. Mark knows to run away. In a Reddit post Scott Cawthon made, teasing the fact that they picked a script for the FNAF movie a long time ago, he showcased a bunch of scripts that didn't make the final cut. Scripts that they made but decided against. Some of them are very funny, like Plushies Take Manhattan. Scott, please make that movie, hire Jim Henson Company, but like specifically the Muppet department. But one of those scripts that they turned down was codenamed Cassidy. He mentioned that this would have been great for the lore divers and mega fans, but it would have lost casual audiences and been too confusing. So if Scott codenamed the lore-dense script Cassidy, then clearly this name is incredibly important to the lore. Pair that with the fact that, like I mentioned, they believe their name belongs on a gravestone, and in the FNAF 6 epilogue you get this image, with the tombstones of the MCI victims and one tombstone on the hill by itself. Many theorists agree that these 4 that have the MCI victim names and one blank one is the spot for Cassidy, the one on the hill being Charlotte. So pairing this all together, a lot of FNAF fans decided that Cassidy was the vengeful spirit, part of the missing child incident victims. And they are so vengeful because they were put inside the Golden Freddy suit and the spring locks were turned on, giving them a more agonizing death and making them more aggressive. But at the end of the day, it is still a debate. There's no definitive answer either way, or possibly there wasn't one until today's theory. So what is 14 theory? Recently, a video was put out by Narrow Raven about a theory he made with help from T-Dreads and Unwithered Truth. The theory video and stream highlights are in the description, as well as all of their channels, so make sure to go check them out. Not to mention the full context for 14 theory. I want to be clear as we get into this, I'm only going to be covering their major points. There's a lot of supporting evidence and other side theories that branch off from this that I'm not going to cover, so if you want the full theory, check out their video. And I also want to be clear that their theory doesn't specifically decide on Cassidy versus Andrew versus Michael, but I'm using their theory to get there, so that part is my bias, don't put that on them. Anyway, what is 14 theory? When they were looking over Ultimate Custom Night, they noticed something strange in the series of Toy Chica the High School Years cutscenes. Well, more strange than the concept of high schooler Toy Chica. Anyway, that being in this image of the lockers in the hallway, only the number 14 is slanted, specifically the locker next to Toy Chica, which was strange. There was only one number of this entire roster that gets larger than 14 slanted. Why did they do that? But then they looked at the roster and noticed that the 14th character on it was Golden Freddy, whose head is slanted. And who's number 15 right next to it? Springtrap, or William Afton. So not only do we have 14 being slanted, but since, as we all know,
Toy Chica is William Afton.
William Afton is on number 15 twice. So this is beginning to link Golden Freddy with the number 14. But the evidence doesn't just stop there. Like I mentioned, there are unlockable cutscenes in Ultimate Custom Night. 7 Toy Chica and the High School Year cutscenes, 6 Bear of Vengeance cutscenes, and 1 final cutscene, the one I mentioned of Golden Freddy fading into the distance. The final cutscene you unlock. If you've been counting, the 14th cutscene you unlock. Each cutscene unlocking after 700 points. In other words, you can unlock this cutscene by getting 4920, not 5020, which is 7 squared. Looking deeper into this, there are multiple backgrounds you can use throughout Ultimate Custom Night, one of them being the FNAF 4 bedroom, which has these stars on the top, which isn't too notable. The original FNAF 4 bedroom has them too, but the original FNAF 4 bedroom has 9, and this FNAF 4 bedroom has 14, one of them being differently colored than the rest of them. And no, this isn't lighting. They specified in the comments they checked the files to be sure, and the lighting is not the issue here. That star is a different color. But frankly, most importantly, to bolster this argument even further, how many people died because of William Afton's actions? Well, there's all 3 of his children. The bite victim ultimately died from William's negligence. Like I mentioned, Michael put him in there, but William was the one not watching his kids after all. Elizabeth Afton died due to his negligence, because sure, he can say, don't go near that animatronic, but dude, you made an incredibly dangerous animatronic, told your daughter you made it for her, and then just trusted that she wouldn't go to it? And of course, Michael Afton dies due to William's actions because he said, go into the sister location bunker, a bunker he knows is incredibly dangerous. There's Charlotte Emily, who he just straight up killed, and speaking of just straight up killing, there's the MCI, which had 5 victims, and if we count the DCI from FNAF 2, there's 5 bodies in the Save Them cutscene. So that's 5 DCI, 5 MCI, 3 Afton kids, and 1 Henry kid. That makes 14 victims. Now, their theory goes on to cover sub-evidence and other possible connections, especially leading into the 7 motif throughout all of Ultimate Custom Night, especially since Ultimate Custom Night is the 7th game in the franchise. And that's incredibly worthwhile, and you should check it out in their video. But I want to stay on this number 14, because I think we can use this to actually solve not only Golden Freddy, but who's inside Golden Freddy. Because at the end of the day, why is the number 14 important at all, even if we can link it to Golden Freddy? Well, for one, there's the Ultimate Custom debate I mentioned at the start of the video. I think all of this evidence helps to suggest that this game is incredibly connected to Golden Freddy. And that being said, Golden Freddy's vessel is holding the spirit of whoever is conducting Ultimate Custom Night. They're throwing this number 14 in William's face. These are your misdeeds. These are your victims. This is what you've done. But if 14 truly is the number of William Afton's victims, then there's no room for Cassidy and Andrew to exist. I've in the past given credence to the theory that yes, Cassidy exists, but Andrew exists as well in the game's timeline. They exist separately and they fulfill separate roles. Cassidy is a victim of the MCI, and Andrew is either a secret 6th victim as explored in Into the the pit, or he's just some other victim from William that ends up becoming the vengeful spirit. It's the only way I could square it away in my brain, because we know for a fact Cassidy exists. Scott mentioned that this name is important to the lore. The name is mentioned in the security logbook. This name is relevant for some reason. But if Cassidy and Andrew both exist, and they're both victims of William Afton, we have a major problem here. That would bring the victim count to 15. Golden Freddy would be 15 in Ultimate Custom Night, unlockable on the 15th cutscene, but it's not. All of this is 14, which means there's no room for Andrew in this timeline. Now, to be clear, this isn't trying to say that Golden Freddy is the 14th victim, like sequentially. That would be impossible, as this list includes the DCI and Michael Afton. And say what you want about the order of the early deaths in the franchise, but I think we can all agree that the MCI happened before FNAF 2 and before Sister Location. Like, maybe you could argue Sister Location, but like, the MCI happened before FNAF 2. We can agree on that. But I will mention, on note of the death order, the FNAF 4 bedroom. Those star decals on the Ultimate Custom Night background could be hinting to the death order that Scott intended. After all, we know that Susie was the first of the MCI, so we can theorize that Cassidy was the last, since in this order there are 6 stars and then the white star. So if Susie happened first, then the 5 before that white star have to be the MCI, which leaves 1 victim in front and 7 victims behind. If we can only put 1 victim at the very beginning of the timeline before the MCI, I think the bite victim makes the most sense. Otherwise, the MCI has to take place before likely 1983, which conflict bite victim first in this scenario I think makes the most sense here. So we have bite victim, then MCI, then we have 2 stars for either Charlotte or Elizabeth back to back, then we have 5 stars for the DCI and 1 last star for Michael Afton. And I'll be honest, I don't really understand, but I fell down this hill and I've got glue on my hands and I've got records on my fingers. That was a dumb joke. Anyway, I'll be honest, I don't know how I feel about that death order. MCI happening before Charlotte or Elizabeth's deaths feels strange to me, but it is possible. And this is solid evidence for it. Regardless, it's worth bringing up. But that's how I feel about a lot of this theory, to be honest with you. I think this is the perfect example of my favorite kind of FNAF theories. I'm not presenting this theory to you that someone else made to say that this is definitively truth, and if you disagree with it, you're stupid, this is the only way to believe. Is it 100% guaranteed to be true and inarguable? No, not really. It is completely likely here that this is just an insane coincidence. But Scott doesn't do coincidences. Yes, he does. Shut the hell up. But this seems logical, and there's a pattern here that you can follow and keep stretching out to find different connections endlessly. Anytime you see Golden Freddy linked to 14 or William Afton linked to 15, you can make a connection here. The fact even got brought up that the 15th story of Fazbear Frights is The Man in Room 1280, the story all about William Afton. And is that intended? Probably not, but it's a cool as hell connection. And that's how theory crafting in this franchise works, to be honest with you. You take your evidence, you take your pattern, and you look for connections. And keep looking for connections until you've exhausted all of your options, even if they're unlikely, even if you don't think they make sense. Because at the end of it, you can look back at what you've connected and see what points make the most sense and are the most sound. Because you can always look back and go, actually, that one's not it, we're going with this one. But you can only look back if you've made those connections and stretched it out as far as it will go. So again, a massive shout out and great work to Narrow Raven, T-Dreads, Unwithered Truth, all of you that put the work in to make this theory. And y'all gotta go check them out in the description below. What if I told you that a theory exists that could solve why the Glamrock animatronics act so strange, why Vanessa is the only human employee at the Pizzaplex, why Freddy deteriorates throughout Security Breach, and why there's a scooper in the basement underneath? And it all comes down to one of FNAF's core themes, corporate greed. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. And yes, I'm covering someone else's theory again. I'm not trying to make a habit out of this, but theorists in the community put out a banger back to back. And frankly, with Poppy Playtime and Secret of the Mimic coming down the pipeline, this was kind of a now or never video, so I picked now. But I promise I'll come up with my own theories soon. Security Breach is a game that I don't think we're supposed to fully understand yet. And that's not a bad thing, nor is it copium. Five Nights at Freddy's has always had fragmented storytelling. Throughout the franchise's history, down to day 1, you could figure out what was actively happening in the moment, but we never really knew the why, or the grander context of our situations. We could only guess until future installments would give us more context. I mean, that's why people love this franchise so much, the theory side of things. Don't believe me? Look at FNAF 1. If you only played FNAF 1 and no other games existed yet, which I was there, I'm sure many of you were too, you could figure out that, like, okay, some some kids were killed and were possibly hidden inside of the animatronic suits. And those animatronic suits are probably possessed by the dead children and are acting out and lashing out in revenge on the world. But we didn't know why this happened, we didn't know who the kids were, and we didn't really even know why they were attacking us. Frankly, it wouldn't be until Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator that we would fully understand the context of FNAF 1. And even to this day, we still don't know it confirmed. Like many fans agree, William Afton killed 5 children, stuffed their bodies into those suits, it was the missing child incident. Now in the FNAF 1 location, it's after the FNAF 2 location, and we're likely playing as Michael Afton, either helping William or trying to find him. And all of this was probably associated with William's experiments on immortality, not just some random act. Like, all of this information and story took 6 games to come out to figure out. And like I mentioned, still to this day, a lot of that is up to conjecture. You can disagree that Michael Afton is the protagonist. You can disagree that William Afton did this in pursuit of immortality. Whether or not you think it's probable or likely, it's still not confirmed. I know this is old ground, but I just always want to specify that before going into the weird storytelling of Security Breach, because a lot of fans, I feel like, look at the lore of Security Breach and go, this doesn't make any sense. We don't have enough information to know what's going on here. We never have. That's the point of Five Nights at Freddy's. But like I've alluded to, Security Breach is no different. At the very base of this game, we know that we are a little boy stuck in the Freddy Fazbear Mega Pizzaplex. We can't get out until morning, and there are animatronics out to get us for some reason. And we know that through playing the game, we have to hide and survive to make it to 6 a.m. where the doors will open. And we can either escape or try to end this so future kids don't get trapped and threatened. But that's all we can get from the base game. Upon release, and even now, we don't know for sure why this is happening. We have a lot of good theories and guesses, but there's no confirmation as to why the animatronics are attacking us, what Vanny and Glitchtrap are doing at the Pizzaplex. Frankly, we don't even know how Gregory got there. We don't even know what Burntrap and the Blob are. Hell, we don't even know what their actual names are according to the character encyclopedia. Many people thought Ruin was going to give us answers for this, but instead it introduced us to the Mimic and gave us a whole litany of new questions. But I think the answers for these Security Breach questions just aren't here yet. They're for later installments like Five Nights at Freddy's has always done. And frankly, a lot of it probably won't be in Secret of the Mimic. Secret of the Mimic is a prequel all about the Mimic, I'm assuming, so that in mind, we'll probably get a lot of answers about the Mimic in that game, but we probably won't get any answers about what's going on at the Pizzaplex. I would assume that's going to come later down the pipeline. And frankly, like the original series, I wouldn't doubt if we never get clear and concise answers for these questions. We'll likely just get more clues and context for it. I bring this up to state that all we can do for now about Security Breach is make our best guesses, our theories, judging off of the information we have, what we know about the universe, and where we think the story is heading. In other words, you gotta make a lot of assumptions. So when I heard that a theory came out that purports to solve all of these mysteries, or at least most of them, in one fell swoop, color me intrigued. And friend of the channel, She's Always Nervous, seems to have done just that, in a theory she later dubbed Remnant Plex. And I think some of you may know where this theory is going based off that name, but we can't jump into it right away. In fact, this theory doesn't start at Security Breach. In order to really understand this theory, we have to go back, all the way back to Sister Location was the first FNAF game that really focused on the sci-fi elements of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. Don't get me wrong, there's always been sci-fi elements here. I mean, the animatronics, for one, are way more advanced than we've ever had, and they existed in, like, the 80s. And in retrospect, looking at Scott Cawthon's previous works and Five Nights at Freddy's in general, I get the feeling that Scott Cawthon prefers sci-fi over mystery and horror anyway, but I don't know the guy. That's just the impression that I get. But while science fiction was always a part of FNAF, Sister Location is where it really took the forefront and tried to scientifically explain the weird possessions that have happened in this game franchise. And it's where we see William Afton, likely for the first time, experimenting with what we now know as Remnant. William was likely studying the effects of possession and seeing if it could be manipulated for his benefit. He found that when you took possessed metal and melted it down, that possession energy remained with it and could be re-injected and redistributed into new vessels, in effect transferring that power to the new vessel. We see this more directly in the Silver Eyes, where William treats Remnant more so as a battery. Now, in the games, William Afton was using the scooper to extract and inject Remnant, but in the books, he kinda just had a syringe, which look, we're not gonna talk about the fact that in the books, William Afton melted together the original Fazbear animatronics into one big behemoth and then kept it kinda liquidy so he could take a syringe and just molten metal into a see-through, so probably glass syringe, and then re-inject it into the chest of the Fun Times. We're not going to talk about how senseless and idiotic that is, okay? Suspension of disbelief. It's just impressive that of this entire scene, the thing that's the least believable is this goddamn syringe. Regardless, he literally explains in this scene that injecting the Remnant into the Fun Times powers them and gives them new purpose. But again, in the games, the scooper is the machine that does that, which is why so many people were confused when at the end of Security Breach Ruin, we find that in the caves and basement underneath the Pizzaplex, there's a new scooper. So why? Who created it and what are they using it for? Realistically, it seems like somebody had access to the blueprints of the original scooper room and made a modernized and updated version of that machinery. I mean, we have to consider the sister location bunker was likely built sometime in the 80s. So if we're in like 2035, technology has come a long way, and comparing the two scoopers to each other, technology has come a long way. But again, why is this here? For a long time, I just assumed that this was the original sister location scooper that may have been updated since then. Because if you believe that the FNAF 6 pizzeria was built in the original Fredbear's location, then according to this fuse map and sister location, the sister location bunker and the Fredbear's restaurant must have been close enough to be connected via power cables. So if we're in the FNAF 6 pizzeria and we travel a good distance through these caves, we might end up in the sister location bunker. It is plausible, but realistically, whether or not the scooper is the original scooper or not, that's immaterial to this theory. All that matters is there is an active and usable scooper that is accessible to the Pizzaplex via this strange elevator we don't see the top of, or these caves. And this is where we get to She's Always Nervous's theory. We know that as of now, Fazbear Entertainment is a gigantic corporation, greedy and callous at that. They have a mega Pizzaplex, and if the books are to be believed, they have several mega Pizzaplexes. And like, you guys have seen the Pizzaplex. I can't stress enough to you how big this thing is. It's basically a whole mall. Frankly, it's too big. Don't clip that out of context. And we know from Tales from the Pizzaplex, and even if you don't believe the books are fully canon, it's at this point inarguable that they're more true to the games than not. We know the character of this company from the games. A company very willing to cover up deaths at their establishment. Employees die while testing your machines? Board it up and act like it didn't happen. Kids get trapped in your attractions and die horribly? Cover it up, wash it away. Didn't happen, we didn't see it. And Fazbear kind of always has been like this, right? I mean, all the way back to the original games, we had sentences like, if someone goes missing, we'll file a police report after we've thoroughly cleaned the building. They've always been, not my problem, as a corporation. But more than ever, they are willing to sacrifice the few to protect the company. We also know from Help Wanted that Fazbear Entertainment likely reclaimed everything that ever existed in this company. Anything that was previously owned by Fazbear, and likely anything that was owned by William Afton. Since in Help Wanted, we see parts of Sister Location, the Funtime Gallery for Funtime Foxy, and the like, which means Fazbear would have gone to the Sister Location bunker at some point to get that information. So, like Henry in FNAF 6, Fazbear Entertainment would have received all the blueprints of the Sister Location technology, including the scooper. Now, when Henry got these blueprints, he's generally a good person. So he saw, oh my god, William Afton is turning people into batteries for animatronics. I need to put a stop to this and make it so all these victims can finally rest. But if a greedy, callous, willing to sacrifice people company like Fazbear's got their hands on the blueprints that could essentially say, hey, if you kill someone, you get free energy for a long time, they might want to take him up on that offer. All they would need to do is have this scooper be built, not say what it's for, and then hire someone who's willing to do the dirty work. Someone who is expendable, not directly connected to the company, but owes the company. Someone who can take all the blame if it gets found out. Enter Vanessa. We don't know how much of Glitchtrap Fazbear Entertainment actually knows of, but likely they know about Vanessa, a worker who's moved from job to job relating to Fazbear and seems weirdly attached to Help Wanted. She's their someone who could take those who wander off and children who stray too far, lead them to a back room, kill them so they possess an animatronic. And once that animatronic, and there's plenty, there's literally literally a warehouse filled with endoskeletons. There's literally endoskeletons hooked up and ready to be used right outside of FNAF 6. Why else would they be down here? But once one of them is possessed, all they have to do is be led to the scooping room and extract that remnant. Pump that into your pizzaplex, and your massive entertainment facility with all of its animatronics is powered on. Something that could make their pizzaplex run. Something that could make their animatronics smarter and more lifelike than anyone could possibly replicate. But what evidence would we have to point to the fact that the entire pizzaplex is running off of remnant? Well, She's Always Nervous said it best, so I'll let her take this one.
How do we know? Well, just listen. And I bet the healing powers of Remnant keep those glam rock animatronics looking beautiful. That is, until the power starts being diverged under Rockstar Row, and Freddy starts to get cracks all over his exoskeleton. He starts to look dirty, oily even. It's as if he's slowly falling apart, the way one might when their supply of Remnant is running low.
This is one of the few times I've heard a compelling explanation for why the wet floorbots are crying in pain. And frankly, this is the first time I've ever heard a compelling argument for why Freddy weirdly deteriorates throughout the game. Like, sure, he gets into a couple scuffles now and then, but he's literally cracking apart by the end of the game, and he hasn't gone through that much stress. But the fact that we learn specifically at the beginning of the game that he is on reduced power, and only having the necessary power to keep him running, bolsters this argument. Because if he's low on Remnant, like we see in Frailty, like we see in To Be Beautiful, these effects that Remnant can give you can wear off. But let's extend this theory, because there is a lot more to just this theory. There's a lot more evidence for it, there's a lot more implications of it, and especially in the original video by She's Always Nervous. I didn't even go into her connections with the Vanny Mask and Return to the Pit. So seriously, do go check out this full video. The link is in the description below. Subscribe to She's Always Nervous. She's a great content creator, but I don't want to just cover her theory and leave it at that. I want you to have a reason to go watch that video, and I want to meaningfully add to this. I don't want it to just be a summary of her theory. So let's take Remnant Plex, and for now, assume that it's true. What would that mean for Security Breach and FNAF in general moving forward? Well, if this is true, Vanessa being made the only human employee at the Pizzaplex suddenly doesn't have to be Glitchtrap hacking the systems. For most theories, mine included, the assumption was made that once Glitchtrap is inputted into the Pizzaplex, he makes his way through the security protocols to take over the emails of the CEO, and then through that system is able to push Vanessa into the only human employee and eventually get everyone else fired. And that's all well and good, but there was always this suspension of disbelief we had to have, because either the CEO literally does nothing, which is very true to life, and doesn't even notice these emails happening and his whole employee structure changing underneath his feet, or they kill the CEO and nobody checks in on them. Both are very implausible, but we had this suspension of disbelief because there was no other better explanation. But now it doesn't have to be. If Fazbear was planning to power the Pizzaplex with Remnant, this was likely a plan only known by the incredibly high up on the ladder. The more people know about this, the bigger the risk that it leaks and gets out. So likely only the CEO, maybe a few trusted underlings, know about this plan. So that explains why even in interviews, other employees at Fazbear were like, hey, why is Vanessa being recommended this job? She's nice, but she's not a security guard. And then that gets pushed aside from higher ups and she gets pushed right to the position, because the higher ups know Vanessa really isn't there to be a security guard. Vanessa is there to power the Pizzaplex, and her security guard role just helps facilitate that process. Somebody broke in? Cool. That's someone to power the machine. Cops show up because somebody called 911 from inside the Pizzaplex? Vanessa, as the security guard, can just say, yeah, you know, kids keep pranking us. No one's broken in. I've got the camera logs. Don't worry. And then that gets waved away. And of course, this all goes on Vanessa. So even if somehow this did get out, all Fazbear has to do is go, we're so sorry, we had no idea a security guard was crazy. We fired her, don't worry. And then they keep on going. More than that, this better explains the power outages than anything before. We learned from the duffel bag messages that power keeps getting siphoned under Roxy Raceway into the FNAF 6 pizzeria. And so much power is being siphoned into that pizzeria that it's causing brownouts. The assumption was kind of just made that, like, okay, I I guess these experiments require a lot of electricity, which like, it isn't super clear why, it is just a couple rooms and like 2 machines, but whatever, suspension of disbelief. But if Vanessa and Glitchtrap are trying to recreate William Afton in some way, they would need a lot of remnant, which would explain why Vanessa so readily accepted this job. She can work as almost a double agent. Sure, she's powering the Pizzaplex for Fazbear, but for Glitchtrap, she's skimming off the top and taking that excess remnant pumping throughout the Pizzaplex and siphoning it back to FNAF 6 for the experiments to bring William back in some way. Not necessarily literally bringing William back, but maybe the experiment was, let's take Burntrap, pump him full of remnant, and put the Mimic 1 program in the head, take the power and give it a consciousness, something that gets revisited several times in the FNAF books. And it doesn't just explain this. Frankly, almost all of the weirdness of the Pizzaplex and security breach could be explained by the fact that remnant is pumping through the veins of this building. Nervous already mentioned the wet floor bots, but it's more than that. The arcade games are somehow connected to Glitchtrap and the Vanny persona, and likely the GGY persona. There are Nightmarion plushes all over the Pizzaplex with no explanation. This is that explanation. The remnant connects them all. To top this all off, if this FNAF 6 experiment is requiring all this remnant, and Vanny is siphoning that remnant from the restaurant and inputting it into the FNAF 6 pizzeria, this could explain what the blob is doing. If the blob, or the Tangle, is this big conglomerate of agony and the refuse of the FNAF 6 fires, and the remainder of the victims of this plot, then it might be seeking that very remnant. In doing these experiments, Vanny might be creating irresistible bait. If the FNAF AR gameplay is to be believed, which like take it as you will because it's an incredibly strange game that wasn't made by Scott Cawthon, a lot of it was scrapped, it's currently unplayable, and they call this floating glowing orb remnant, which like the book states several times, remnant is specifically spiritual energy inside of metal, so take this all as you will. But if the FNAF AR gameplay is to be believed, then Agony is somewhat drawn to remnant. They have almost this magnetic quality, which if true, could explain why the Tangle is so obsessed with this FNAF 6 pizzeria. If it's filled with remnant, it's trying to get that remnant. I think the idea of all of this being powered by remnant has a lot of merit to it, and I think this could assuade a lot of the debates about security breach in general. Many theorists are fully against the idea of any of the Glamrocks being possessed at all, myself included, but likewise, many theorists do believe that some of the Glamrocks are possessed, namely Glamrock Freddy being possessed by Michael Afton, because there is so much weirdness in the way the Glamrock animatronics act. But this could be the explanation that solves both camps. The Glamrock animatronics, as well as the Pizzaplex in general, are powered by the energy of the memories and spirits of the victims of this plot, but they're not specifically possessed by any one ghost, so Michael Afton and the others can still be resting in peace. It's just the energy of the Pizzaplex wavering their core programming. But what do you think? I think this is an excellent theory, and again, amazing job to She's Always Nervous. Please go check out that full video in the description below and drop her a sub. You should also drop me a sub too, but you know,